Welcome back. I'm Neil Chase, author of Iron Dogs, writer-director of Spin the Wheel and Contamination. And today, we're talking about one of the biggest issues that I see in scripts. Plot-driven stories versus character-driven stories. Which one's better? What's the difference? And why do so many scripts fall apart because of it? And most importantly, how do you fix it? Now, this is a topic I care about a lot, and it's one of the specific ways I've helped producers, filmmakers, writers, through both story coaching and rewrites to strengthen promising scripts so that they become more marketable, more bankable. I've helped projects get grant funding, attract investor interest, and move towards being greenlit. And one of the best ways I've done this is by zeroing in on this exact problem. Is the story being driven by the characters, or is it dragging them around like some kind of luggage? See, when a script works, the audience leans in. They want to follow the people in the story. They care about what happens next. When it doesn't work, well, then they just sit back and just, watch the machinery, counting the minutes until it's over. Or worse, they check out entirely. As an actor, I've been in my share of films where this was a big problem, where characters made obviously dumb or unbelievable choices just because the script needed them to get from point A to point B, and not because the character's actual journey demanded it. And as an actor, that's a pretty frustrating place to be, because unless you're invited to help fix it, it's not always your place to step in. And even if you do bring it up, well, not every writer or director is open to hearing it. Now, luckily, as a story coach and writing instructor, I've been able to help writers solve this problem before they get to the filming stage. So today, let's break it all down. We'll define both terms, look at the differences, talk about why writers use each one, and then go through a bunch of movie examples. And then I'll tell you where I land. Character-driven stories are almost always the right way to go. Not because the plot doesn't matter. It does. But because the best plots come from character and not from random events. So hit like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Are you ready? Grab your popcorn. Let's get started. Okay, let's start with definitions. A plot-driven story is one where the main engine is the external sequence of events. Things happen, then more things happen, then bigger things happen. And the characters have to adjust accordingly and react in such a way as to propel them to the next sequence of things. The audience is being pulled along by twists, reveals, missions, chases, puzzles, set pieces, danger, spectacle. Now, plot-driven doesn't automatically mean it's bad. It just means that the emphasis is on what happens next, more than on who the character becomes. The story often asks questions such as, can they stop the explosion? Can they solve the mystery? Can they escape the monster? Can they save the world? Examples of plot-driven movies I think you know very well. Jurassic Park, Speed, Armageddon, National Treasure, The Da Vinci Code. Let's face it, most disaster and surface-level action movies. In these stories, the plot is the hook. Now, the danger with plot-driven writing is that characters can become reactive instead of active. They become people the story happens to rather than the people whose choices shape the story. And when that happens, you start seeing the problem we've all seen 1,000 times. Characters making weird, stupid, illogical, or simply out of character decisions because the plot needs them to. Now, depending on the movie and skills of the filmmaker and cast, this doesn't mean the film's going to be a failure. It might even be a big hit. But no one would ever call it thought-provoking or deep. Worse, if the audience calls BS on character motivations simply because the plot needs them to act or react in a certain way, that's usually when the audience starts checking out. Now, on the flip side, a character-driven story is built around the internal journey of the protagonist or central characters. The main question isn't just what happens, it's who is this person? What do they want? What do they need? What are they afraid of? What choices will they make? And what will those choices cost them? In a character-driven story, the plot still matters a lot, but the plot grows organically out of the decisions the characters make. That's the key. The character wants something, so they choose an action. That choice creates consequences. Those consequences force another choice, and on it goes. It creates momentum that feels both realistic and true to the established character. Some examples of character driven movies, well, they include The Godfather, Good Will Hunting, Black Swan, Whiplash, No Country for Old Men, Manchester by the Sea, Joker, even Breaking Bad if we're talking TV. And this isn't just relegated to dramas or dialogue driven movies. Some of the strongest genre movies are deeply character driven too. Think about Aliens, The Dark Knight, Mad Max Fury Road, The Descent, Logan, Terminator 2. These films don't just move for the sake of moving forward. They mean something because the character is at the wheel, steering the plot in a certain direction. So why do writers lean plot heavy? Well, there's a few reasons. Plot feels easier to control. A lot of writers feel safer when they're outlining events. Big opening, inciting incident, midpoint twist, climax, done. That can feel efficient, especially when someone is trying to write something commercial. They think in terms of moments instead of motivation. And that's how you end up with movies like, say, Rise of Skywalker. That film is almost entirely powered by plot urgency. Go here, find this, decode that, race there, escape this. It's constantly moving. But a lot of that movement feels imposed by the script, not earned by the characters. You have a movie where characters are sent on various missions because the plot needs the next thing to happen, and not because those choices naturally grow out of who they are. It's busy and full of spectacle, but emotionally razor thin. Next, spectacle is seductive. Explosions are easy to pitch, big twists are easy to market, and high concepts sound exciting. It's much easier to say dinosaurs loose in a theme park or aliens attack the White House than to say a man's fear of failure destroys his relationships. One sounds like a trailer. The other sounds like, let's face it, actual storytelling. And that's where films like Jurassic World Dominion get into trouble. There's a lot going on in that movie. Legacy characters, giant creatures, secret corporations, chases, set pieces, but much of it feels like a delivery system for moments rather than a story being driven by human choices. Characters are often just moving from one action sequence to the next, and the emotional spine gets buried under the noise. I mean, contrast that with the original Jurassic Park, where essentially the same event happens. Dinosaurs loose in a park. But the plot is less driven by those events as it is Alan's journey of self-discovery as those events happen. Number 3, writers confuse motion with momentum. This is a big one. A script can have a lot happening and still feel dead. Why? Because movement is not momentum. Momentum comes from investment. A car chase means more when we care about who's in the car and why they can't lose. That's why a movie like Transformers: Age of Extinction can feel exhausting instead of exciting. It has endless plot movement, action, destruction, escalation, but because character motivation is often thin or buried, the audience is just watching events happen. It's all motion and not much emotional momentum. Number 4, plot can become a substitute for drama. Some writers throw in complications because they think more plot means more interesting. But more plot is not the same as more drama. Take Army of the Dead. The premise is fun, the world is fun, the setup is loaded with potential. But the movie piles on twists, side missions, betrayals, time loop hints, government conspiracies, zombie hierarchies, and character secrets. And the problem is most of it doesn't deepen the emotional core. It just creates more stuff. And don't get me wrong, I like this movie, but that's what plot-heavy writing often does when it's insecure. It adds layers instead of strengthening the foundation. And what you often end up with is more of a muddled mess that's good at best, but never as great as it could be. Now let's get to the big point. Character-driven stories are stronger because they create emotional cause and effect. They don't just ask, what happens next? They ask, why does this matter to this person? Look at The Godfather. This is one of the best examples ever of this. Michael Corleone doesn't just get swept into the mafia plot because the movie needs him there. He makes active choices to protect his father, to kill Sollozzo and McCluskey, to go into exile, to come back, to reconnect with Kate, to take power. Each choice changes him, for better or worse. Each choice creates consequences, also for better or worse. And those consequences force him into making new choices. The plot doesn't drag Michael around by the nose. It's Michael who creates the plot. That's character-driven storytelling at its best. Or look at The Dark Knight. People talk about the Joker as a character, and rightly so, but what really makes this movie work is that it's constantly forcing Batman and Harvey Dent into moral choices. At every turn, the Joker is testing them, and it's their changing motivations with respect to both themselves and each other that drive their decisions and actions. So the plot is exciting, yes, but it's also built around character pressure. Who bends, who breaks, who compromises, who doesn't, who's willing to sacrifice everything for their ideals and the greater good. Each character's journey, Bruce, Harvey, Joker, is a morality tale on a different and yet interconnected path. Each character's choices influence the other two, and vice versa, leading to a movie that's surprisingly complex instead of just another superhero movie. Now let's look at where plot-driven stories get into trouble. They start asking characters to do things that no believable human being would do. And I've seen this quite a few times as an actor. A character separates from a group to walk into danger alone. Why? Well, because the next scene needs them to be isolated. Someone hides important information. Why? Because the movie needs a third act reveal. The hero ignores an obvious solution. Why? Well, because there's 40 minutes still left in the film and we can't wrap it up that quickly. See, that's not storytelling. That's the writer moving chess pieces around, and audiences can feel that. There are too many examples to count where this happens. Just off the top of my head, let's look at a few culprits, starting with Prometheus. This is one of the most famous examples in modern sci-fi horror. The film is full of otherwise smart people making unbelievably dumb decisions. You have astronaut scientists taking off their helmets in a completely alien environment. A biologist getting cozy with an obviously dangerous alien creature. Characters wandering off alone in a hostile, unknown structure. Now, you can absolutely write intelligent characters making bad calls under stress. That happens in real life. But in Prometheus, a lot of these choices don't feel like panic, hubris, or a character flaw in any kind of believable way. They feel like the movie needs people to split up and die. That's a big difference. And what about Nobody 2? I've talked about this movie before in a prior video, but I want to mention it again because it's a prime example of a movie locking itself into a climax and bending the characters to get there. Hutch and his family have multiple chances to leave town once it becomes clear that they're in danger. But they stay, even when leaving would make far more sense, especially with his own family at risk. So instead of the tension growing naturally out of trapped characters making hard choices, it feels more like the movie's forcing them to remain in place because the final showdown has already been decided. That's the giveaway, when the destination matters more than the logic that gets us there. Or how about weak horror logic that happens in most modern slasher films? Take Texas Chainsaw Massacre of 2022 as an example. Here we have got plot overriding character logic. Characters repeatedly stay in situations they should flee. They ignore obvious warnings and behave as if they're trapped in a slasher template rather than responding like real people in danger. The result is that tension collapses because instead of fearing for them, the audience starts judging them. Basically, they're idiots. See, once the audience starts thinking, why would you do that? Instead of, oh no, don't do that, well, you've lost them. And the moment the audience sees the characters as idiots, that's when they stop caring for them. That's when they turn on them and start cheering for the bad guys instead. Or how about big budget disaster films like Moonfall? This is where the problem becomes really visible. In a movie like Moonfall, characters often exist to explain things, react to increasingly ridiculous threats, and move from set piece to set piece to set piece. The plot is the star. The people are basically tour guides inside the chaos. Now, that can be fun for a little while, but it doesn't stick because the audience isn't emotionally anchored. And that's the core issue. When plot driven writing goes bad, it doesn't just become implausible, it becomes replaceable. If the characters aren't driving anything, then they could be almost anyone else. And if they could be almost anyone else, well, then why should we care about them at all? Now, to be fair, this isn't black and white. A lot of great movies have strong plot and strong character, and that's the ideal. And you'll see it most often in great genre films, like Mad Max Fury Road. This movie's incredibly plot driven on the surface. Drive here, turn around, drive back. But what makes it great isn't the chase, it's Furiosa's choices, Max's growing willingness to trust others, Nux's redemption, the wives choosing freedom over captivity. The movie works because it uses action to reveal character. What about Aliens? Another fantastic example. Yes, it's a mission movie. Yes, the plot is clear and external, but Ripley drives the story through her choices, her trauma, her fears and flaws, her courage, and ultimately her relationship with Newt. Without that, it's just Space Marines shooting bugs. But with it, it becomes one of the best genre films ever made. Heck, one of the best films, period. So the goal isn't no plot. The goal is plot in service of character. So what do you do if your script feels plot heavy or emotionally hollow? Well, here are a few questions I ask writers all the time. And more importantly, here's why they matter. If I remove the spectacle, is there still a story? If you strip away the explosions, the monsters, the chases, the reveals, is there still a human story underneath it all? That's the first test. Spectacle can distract from weak writing for a little while, but not forever. If all you really have is a sequence of events, then your audience may be entertained in the moment, but they probably won't stay emotionally invested. They might remember the big moment, the creature design, or some cool action beat, but not really the story itself. A strong script should still work in its simplest form. So take away the VFX budget, the stunts, the giant twists, and ask, do I still care about this person and what they're going through? If the answer is no, that's a really good sign of where to start. What does the main character want? And what are they willing to do to get it? This is huge. If the character doesn't want something badly enough, well, they'll stay passive. And passive characters are hard to care about. A protagonist needs drive. Heck, an antagonist and supporting characters, they need drive as well. They need urgency. They need a reason to push forward that feels personal, a goal that is specific to them. It can be love, revenge, survival, freedom, redemption, belonging, whatever it is. It has to matter to them. And then the next question is just as important. What are they willing to risk? Because want without action is just description. The more clearly you understand your character's desire, the easier it is to build scenes around active choices rather than passive reaction. What choices does the protagonist make that actively change the story? Now, this is one of my favorite tests. Not what happens to them, but what do they do that changes the direction of the story? Can you point to moments where the protagonist makes a risky decision, where they choose the wrong person, reveal a secret, take revenge, refuse to back down, or sacrifice something important? In other words, can you see the fingerprints of the character all over the plot? If every major turn happens due to some coincidence, villain action, or external force, and your protagonist is mostly just catching up, then your story is too plot-driven. The audience connects more deeply when the character is helping create the mess they're now stuck in. That's real drama, because it ties in directly to consequences. And speaking of which, what are the consequences? Character-driven stories don't just have choices, they have fallout. That's the part a lot of writers seem to miss. A character makes a bad choice, and then somehow the plot just moves on. But that's not realistic or dramatic. Real drama comes from real consequences. Make a bad choice? Good. Now let them deal with it. Let the lie blow up. Let the relationship crack. Let the wrong call cost them something. Consequences do two big things. They make the story feel real, and they force the character to grow or fail to grow. Either way, that's where audience investment comes from. See, now we're not just watching events. We're watching someone forced to live with what they've done. And honestly, what could be more dramatic than that? And finally, is the ending earned through character? This is the final test. Could this ending only happen because this character made these active choices? If yes, you're probably in good shape. If no, well, the ending feels like something that could happen to anyone else in this situation. Then you don't have a character-driven ending, you've got a pre-planned climax. The best endings feel both surprising and inevitable. Not inevitable because the plot outline said so. Inevitable because the character's journey led them there. Luke must face down Vader in a final showdown for both their sakes. Michael must wipe out rival gangs to secure his legacy and protect his family. Miguel must sing to Coco to save Hector's soul. Ripley must go alone to face the alien queen to rescue Newt. Anything less from any of them would feel inadequate. All or nothing moments, and each one deeply personal and unique to the characters undergoing them. No one else could do what they do in those pivotal moments. That's why the strongest endings feel emotional before they feel clever. They don't just wrap up the story, they pay off the character. And when that happens, well, the audience doesn't just remember what happened, they remember why it mattered. So, which is better? Well, for me, it's not even close. Character-driven stories are superior. They create deeper investment, they feel more truthful, they hold up better over time, and they give the audience a reason to care beyond just the next set piece. Plot matters. Of course it does. But the best plots come out of desire, fear, flaws, choices, consequences, change. That's what makes a story stick. That's what makes audiences feel like they're not just watching events unfold, they're living them with the characters. And that's one of the biggest ways I've helped people improve their own promising but flawed scripts, by helping them spot those moments where the plot is forcing the characters to react and fixing it to make the characters choose and act instead in a way that feels organic, logical, and emotionally resonant. Bottom line, if you've got a script that has a strong idea but something feels off, maybe the characters feel passive, maybe the plot feels mechanical, maybe the emotional core isn't landing, I can help. I offer screenplay coverage and coaching calls, and for select clients, an ongoing service to dive deep and help creators solve all levels of problems before they get to production, and sometimes even during. You'll find the links below. But hey, these are just my 2 cents. What are yours? Let me know in the comments. What's a movie you love because the characters truly drive the story? On the flip side, what's one where the plot clearly drags them around instead? Let me know. And until next time, stay creative.